right, welcome back, everybody. We are going to go ahead and continue to Module 4.3, where we're going to be discussing non-adaptive evolution and speciation. So previously, we've been discussing natural selection and how that is the primary motivator for evolution. But there are other ways in which a population or species can evolve, and that is primarily going to be distinguished by non-adaptive evolution. So that's going to be the focus of our lectures today. So in your book, you're given this great system looking at mice throughout New York City and understanding how their genetics and their populations have divided throughout the city. And recently, there's actually been a study that's very similar, looking actually at Norway rats, or the urban rat, or your common pizza rat, if you will. And what this study did, it interestingly sampled all up and down Manhattan, from the very top of Upper Manhattan to the downtown South locations, and it looked at how genetically similar populations of rat were throughout the area. And what they found was that rats from the northernmost and down through Midtown were much more genetically similar than were downtown rats, and even more interestingly, the downtown West rats and downtown East rats were dramatically different. So these are the types of questions that evolutionary biologists start to think about. Is like, okay, so we're understanding how similar these populations are, even in a very small geography of Manhattan, and what potentially might distinguish these genetic differences that we're seeing, like this wide genetic difference between downtown West rats and downtown East rats, and what characteristics might those populations have that are different than uptown rats. So our driving questions for looking at non-adaptive evolution are going to be, first, what is a gene pool? This is really sort of our primary unit that we're going to be thinking about when we're talking about non-adaptive evolution. Next, how do different evolutionary mechanisms influence the composition of a gene pool? Then, how does the gene pool of an evolving population compare to a gene pool of a non-evolving population? And lastly, how do new species arise, and what can we do to recognize them? So again, in your book, we're given this great example of ecologists looking at mice throughout New York City, and ultimately, that's what we're starting to look at when we're thinking about population genetics. Is we're understanding the study and genetic makeup of populations, and how those compositions might lead to changes. And it's understanding how a group of organisms could potentially be coping with environmental changes. And again, you were given the example of mice in New York City, and we have all these very fragmented environments where there are very few green spaces in some areas, and how these mice might be changing or adapting based on these changes in their environment. So with population genetics, we have to, again, look at our first big tool that we use to understand populations, and that is the gene pool. And ultimately, what a gene pool is, it's the total collection of alleles, which is basically a variant of a gene that creates a trait that we're going to start looking at within a population. And within our gene pool, we want to identify the allele frequency, or the relative proportion of alleles in a population. So looking at the relative proportion of genetic makeup within a population. So let's look at that in terms of a figure. So here we have a gene pool, and within that gene pool we have lots of different mice, and each mice has two alleles. So again, variant of a gene, and again, we're going to go into this more in our genetics unit, but for now, it's enough to know that it's a variant of a gene, and that their two alleles code for one gene, right? So if there are 15 mice, there are 30 alleles for each gene. And we can look at the frequencies of these genes. So for this blue allele, we have a 6 out of 30, so 20% of these mice carry this genetic allele. However, after several generations, this allele frequency might change, and it may change for several reasons, which we're going to go into. But a change in the allele, look, we see a change in allele frequency. So again, this is just sort of the types of vocabulary that we need to think about when we're talking about non-adaptive evolution. So again, changes in allele frequency over time. What does that mean? Ultimately, this is meaning a population is evolving. And, this could be good, bad, or neutral consequences as a result of a population becoming more adaptive to its environment, or as we talked previously, natural selection results in a population adapting. And so now we're looking more specifically at the idea of how genetics are influencing that. So what causes changes in allele frequency? So we've talked about this previously, natural selection, where a population becomes better adapted for its surroundings. But now we're going to start talking about another type of mechanism, which is non-adaptive evolution, and how that changes allele frequency. And that is going to be caused by mutation, genetic drift, and gene flow. These are all concepts that we're going to be covering in our next lecture. But this is a good way to sort of set us up for what we're thinking in terms of understanding natural selection, the genetic gene pool, and ultimately the topic of the next couple lectures, non-adaptive evolution. Okay, great. I'll see you soon. Bye.